Yeah, yeah, I have trouble to see everyone else, but it doesn't matter.
I don't care. Okay. Erev Tov, everyone.
Okay, come on.
One is always amazed in this week's parsha to see the strength of Paro, how he receives blow after blow, makkah after makkah, and he is steadfast in his opinion. He doesn't allow himself to be swayed by it. And only when the last makkah occurs, which is the destruction of Egypt and of his own family, does he waver. But even then, he only wavers for a period of time. In Parshas B'Shalach, we will have him pursue the Jewish people. Start again. So where does this come from? So a cursory reading of the Parsha is that the Ribono Shel Olam hardens his heart. Heaven makes him very stubborn, and that's his strength. The problem with that is, what happened to the question of free will here? What happened to Paro's ability to decide for himself? It says, Vani achzakti a slave Paro, and he won't send out people. So what do you want from Paro? And this raises a greater question, perhaps, as to why the Egyptians were punished. We read in the Torah, in the Brit Ben Absarim, that Ribono Shel Olam said, Ki ger yezaracha beretz lo lahem v'avodum v'inu also marba me'os shona. So they, what do you want? The Egyptians only fulfilled the will of Hashem. So why should they be punished? We find the same idea that the Navi proclaims when he says, Nebuchadnezzar Shevet Hashem. It's not Nebuchadnezzar that destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, he's the whip of God. He's the instrument. Well, that's a very disturbing idea. So then why should there be any punishment visited upon the Egyptians themselves? So this question is raised by the Rambam. And the Rambam has a very interesting take on this. His interpretation is that in the Brit Ben Abtarim, Avraham Avinu was never told it would be the Egyptians. He said, Ger yezaracha beretz shelo lahem. There'll be strangers in the land. That's not theirs. So when the Jews came to Egypt, the Egyptians had the choice whether they would be that land or they could have passed up on it. It was not decreed that they had to do it. So the Rambam says that's the idea of hashgocha. The heavenly guidance leaves room for individual choice. So the heavenly guidance said that there was going to be an enemy, a land that will enslave the Jewish people. Who that land will be, that's up to them. So the Jews could have lived in Egypt like they lived under Yosef, and it would have been fine, and there'd be a different way that the story would happen. It didn't have to happen that way. And the Rambam actually uses the example of actuaries who can tell the insurance company, this and this year we'll have to pay out 15,250 policies. But they cannot tell you which 15,250 policies. That's a different matter completely. And therefore, the Rambam says that's why the Egyptians were punished, because they did it out of their own free will. And therefore, the punishment that they received was deserved. The Ramban quotes the Rambam, but he's of a different opinion. He says the simple explanation is the way we learned in Cheder, that the Brit Ben Abtarim told them that they would be in Egypt. Avraham Avinu understood that. There was no other country that was going to enslave them. But he said, there's slavery and slavery. There's intolerance and live and let live, so to speak. The Egyptians didn't have to be that cruel about it. They didn't have to say, Kol habein hayilod hayoro tashlichu. You didn't have to say, throw the children into the river. They didn't have to whip the Jews. They could have made them their servants. So they would be their servants, their household domestic help. They would work in the fields with them, whatever. But they made them slaves, vayiven, or a miskanos leparo. They made them build cities to Paro. They made them build the piece of Ramses. The Ramban says that's what they were punished for. They were punished for the excess. There's a problem with the Ramban because in the Pasuk it says, V'avodom v'inu also, that was part of the decree. So he addresses that as well. And there's all types of inuyim that exist in the world. And the person can suffer without somebody making that person suffer.
Say if you want to put your hand in your pocket, you want to take
All right, if you want to take out 100 shekel and you take out 200 shekel. So that's already a problem. The problem is you put your hand in the pocket and there's no shekel. That's also a problem. So this is an overriding issue here. So what's with Paro? So the Ramban says again, that Paro has free will here. However, there is such a concept that if you torture somebody, so then he'll say whatever you want to say, even though he doesn't want to say it, even though he doesn't believe it. But because of the fact that he doesn't want any more pain, so he says it. So the Ramban says, the slave Paro, I'll give Paro the strength to hold by his convictions to the end. He will not be influenced by the pain that is being inflicted. The Makkah will not change his mind. That's a very deep thought, that Makkos are, they may change situations, but they don't change the mind. We see to the end, the Germans, Hitler, Goebbels, the whole world collapsed about them. They look at the Churban they brought on Germany. Didn't change their mind. To the last minute, they're killing. So he says that's what happened here in Egypt. That's what the Rebbeinu Shalom told them. Ani chizakti a slave Paro. The Rambam has a different approach. The Rambam says that by Rishoyim, or by ordinary humans as well, there's always a red line somewhere. If you're before the red line, the consequences of one's behavior can be altered. If you cross the red line, then the consequences cannot be altered. But this concept of tshuva is like that too. Tshuva does not change in the main the situation that occurred before. The Rambam has to deal with the question that the avonos become schuyot. He has a whole thing about that. But he says basically, Paro crossed the line. So the first makos, we would let him off. He's not impressed by dam. I understand it because the Khartoumim can make dam. He's not impressed by tzvardeya. The Khartoumim can make tzvardeya. Kinim already they can't take it away, but he's not impressed by it. Mele. But when the makos become of such a nature that they're so destructive of Egypt, so then the Rebbeinu Shalom, and he does not change his mind. He does not take it into account. So then the Shari Tshuva, he says, are closed. Can't change it anymore. The process is too far gone. The consequences already must come. And therefore, he says, why chizakti a slave Paro? Because that's what Paro chose. He went to the extreme. He crossed the line. And that happens. So then that happens. There's no way to retract it. There's no way to fix it. So the judgment of heaven must fall upon him. So in this story of the plagues and the makos, there are great philosophical questions here. How do we look at the hashgacha? How do we look at schar v'onesh? How do we look at a person's bechira? And we see that the Mefarshim are not of one mind, different interpretations as to what the responsibility of Paro was. So for instance, when the Khartoumim told him, Etzba Elohimi, so he had a chance to go back. He could have said, right. When he crosses that line, so then he cannot go back. And those are the ideas, some of the ideas that are involved. Many others are involved here as well. Maybe we'll have a chance tomorrow to talk about them too. But that's the basic opinions here of the two great commentators of Israel, the Rambam and the Ramban. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Rotza Kodesh Baruch Hu L'Zakos Yisrael V'ficha Chirbo Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar Adonai Chafetz Zaman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir. Amen. Yesh Me'Rabot.
Amen.